Hi, I'm Sister Simone Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice and leader of Nuns on the Bus. And welcome to our bus rally. Obviously, we're doing this virtually this year, but you did get a flavor for what it's like to be on the physical bus. But what we've discovered on the virtual bus is that we can have much bigger rallies, include many more people around the country, and come together in a whole new way as one nation as we celebrate and engage in this sacred month of voting. So we're really looking forward to a lively presentation, being engaged, and then making a commitment to ensure that everyone can vote. Everyone has a voting plan. Everybody executes that plan, and we, the people, save our democracy. We can do this, and that's the good news. So let's get started with our rally. And I'm so excited to introduce one of my really good friends, Rabbi Jonah Pesner, who's from the Religion Action Center for Reform Judaism. And what you need to know is Rabbi Pesner is a fabulous stir up of imagination, engagement, and grounded in faith that does justice. And so he's a perfect one to start off our rally. Rabbi Pesner, welcome to Nuns on the Bus virtual.
Well, thank you so much, my incredible teacher, mentor, and friend, Sister Simone Campbell, Network Lobby, and the Nuns on the Bus for bringing this bus rally to my sukkah. And I'm so honored on behalf of all of your Jewish family that you decided that the first stop on the bus tour should be at our sukkah here in my family home. Because it's virtual, I can't actually take you out into the sukkah, but I can at least have the picture next to me. People may not know that your Jewish family across the world are beginning to celebrate the holiday, the festival of Sukkot. Sukkah in Hebrew means booth, and it is a commemoration of the time when we were freed from our slavery in Egypt, and we were journeying through the wilderness towards the promised land. And for 40 years, we dwelt in these booths, these fragile structures that were open like tents, so that we could welcome in the strangers and stragglers and include people in our community. Remember the fragility of life, but also the abundance of the land and the earth that it brings forth. And so as we gather in our Sukkot, our booths, we are reminded this year of the importance not only of the booth of history, but the voting booth, which will all be entering either literally on election day or because we are in election season, vote by mail, vote early, but don't vote often, just vote once. But the importance of this booth. So this year, our sukkah, our booth, is commemorating the importance of voting rights. It's a tradition on Sukkot that we do something called ushpizin, which is welcome guests into our sukkah. And we don't just invite our guests like this interfaith community that's come together to affirm voting rights and the importance of voting and democracy, but we also call, as ushpizin, as guests, famous figures from history, like Moses and Miriam, for example, we would welcome into our sukkah, or Abraham and Sarah. But I want to invoke the names of C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Lewis, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. May all their memories be a blessing, and may they enter into our booths this holiday as a reminder of the importance of voting rights. We in the Reformed Jewish movement are leading a campaign called Kol Kolot, and it's a pun on the Hebrew phrase because kol can mean every or all, but spelled differently, kol can mean voice, but it also means vote. So our campaign is Kol Kolot, every voice, every vote. What C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Lewis, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg all fought for their entire lives was that every voice is heard when every vote is counted. And so my sukkah, my booth this year, in which Justice Ginsburg and C.T. Vivian and Congressman Lewis are sitting with me, a reminder of how I must make sure that the voting booth is open and welcoming and inclusive of all people in our country who want to make sure that their voices are heard. We're taught in the Talmud that a leader should not be selected unless the community is consulted. It is on us. It is our obligation this year, not only to vote, not only to do what Sister Simone called for, which is to have a plan to vote, but to engage others in their ability to vote and make sure they know their rights, that we go and we protect the polls. Our Every Voice, Every Vote campaign, which people can learn more about if you visit the website of the Religious Action Center, which is rac.org, is mobilizing thousands and thousands of idealistic young Jewish leaders to work at the polls to protect our seniors so that they aren't exposed to COVID, to reach across lines of difference, to make sure that churches and mosques and synagogues all have 100% voter participation, and to make sure that democracy is protected as the various tools and tactics to try and discourage voting are pushed back on. So as we go forth in this work, Sister Simone and all of the wonderful faith leaders on this call, thank you all for being our partners in making sure that kol kolot, every voice is heard and every vote is counted. God bless you and thank you. Oh, and I'm supposed to introduce our next speaker, Reverend Tawana Davis, Soul to Soul Sisters. I'm sorry, my soul sister, Tawana Davis. Forgive me.
No worries. Thank you so much, Rabbi. The major job was getting people to understand that they had something within their power that they could use. And it could only be used if they understood what was happening and how group action could counter violence. That's a quote from the late Ella Baker. Hello, everyone. As Rabbi said, I am Reverend Tawana Davis, one of the co-founders of Soul to Soul Sisters, along with Reverend Dr. Dawn Riley Duvall, who sends her love and gratitude. Soul to Soul Sisters is a fiercely faith-based, Black woman-led racial justice organization focused on Black healing and Black liberation. We are located in Denver, Colorado, and our reach is nationwide. One of Soul to Soul Sisters' area of focus is our electoral organizing work through Let My People Vote. Through Let My People Vote, which was created by Reverend Dr. Dawn Riley Duvall, we do nonpartisan work, voter engagement work, working to enfranchise all voting age Black people and cultivate robust and sustained Black political participation. Through Let My People Vote, we increase the awareness of political issues that impact Black people, Black voter registration, Black get out the vote, Black voter protection, and we remind folk who we vote for matters. Centering Black women and the Black women's vote is imperative in this work. Since the 19th Amendment was ratified a century ago, Black women continue to be disenfranchised through voter suppression, intimidation, and violence, including lynching. In 2020, other tactics are being used to stop us from voting. Let My People Vote informs voters of these tactics, empowers voters with the knowledge to ensure the opportunity to vote, and to inform voters of the issues facing Black women and the Black community at large. Let My People Vote is a movement to combat these tactics and other issues facing Black women, issues that include disproportionate death rates of Black women who are diagnosed with breast cancer as compared to white women, issues such as lack of access to adequate health care, issues such as lack of protection and support in domestic violence cases, issues such as lack of affordable childcare or paid family or medical leave, issues such as the unjust murders of Black women with no justice in sight. Let My People Vote is a movement for women like Victoria, who is a young person doing work on the ground in Denver with Get Out the Vote. She says, I do this work because I want to get to know, I want to get justice and liberation. And I know that nobody is going to come and save me. I have to get involved myself if I want to create a society that I live in. My spirit calls me to do the work to get justice for my people. Brianna, who is another person on the ground in Denver doing healing work, centering Black women and Black experience through her Let My People Vote work, says our legislative system functions as it was designed with many flaws and negatively impacts my community. At any rate, Black women's leadership and participation in the voting process is important to me because it is a direct counter to such a system and gives us an opportunity to voice how we envision personal and collective liberation. Voting is an act of liberation. Dr. Emily Towns says liberation is a process that establishes freedom to explore greater dimensions of personhood. She goes on to say liberation as a whole requires that each person acquire an attitudinal mindset that refuses to accept an external restraint which would deny one the right of being. So we vote. And who we vote for matters. We create informed and voters with Let My People Vote. We explain who and what is on the ballot and share how and where to register to vote. As a student of womanism, we center the priorities of Black women by explicitly focusing on the issues and policies that shape our lives and the lives of our community. We center Black women whose voices have been silenced and ignored and marginalized or used as a driving force behind the scenes. We do this in order to lift as we climb, to liberate others as we liberate ourselves, centering Black women for the liberation of all. I close with a quote, words from the late Toni Morrison. I stood at the border, stood at the edge and claimed it as central. I claimed it as central and let the rest of the world move over to where I was. Thank you so much, beloved. Don't forget to vote, and don't forget that who we vote for matters. I now have the divine opportunity to introduce the one and the only, Sister Simone Campbell, Executive Director of Network and the leader of Nuns on the Bus.
Oh, Reverend Davis, you are so clear, so engaged. I feel so stirred up. Yes, it is. I took a few notes because I love your words. The fiercely faithful obligation of voting and to center the needs of Black women. What an important work that you're doing, because we know of the racial disparity in so many issues, how Black families struggle in such different ways because of COVID-19, because of health inequities, because of the racial wealth gap, because. And your work is critical for healing our nation. Thank you. Thank you for that, and for the work of your whole organization. I am refreshed, and I'm sure our listeners are refreshed by your presentation. Thank you. And we will try to be faithful and remember to vote too. Everybody, all communities, we need to prioritize it. But I think one thing that you raised, Reverend Davis, that I really want to pick up on is that voting is hard work. It's not just a popularity contest like some politicians want you to think. It's work. And we've been on our virtual bus trip now for over a week. And every night we hold a town hall in a different virtual town hall in a different part of the country. But what we're hearing is about the critical issues of our time. There is so much concern about healthcare. In the face of this pandemic, the whole concern about how people have access to healthcare, affordable healthcare, and can actually get prescription drugs, not just with promises, but with an actual policy that can make a difference. We also have heard a lot about the wealth and income gap that is growing during the pandemic. It is so shocking to me that the ultra rich are getting wealthier, while those who are in the bottom 60% of our country in terms of income, we've all experienced a reduction in income, just as the wealthy who don't need it are making more. We need to prioritize this inequity as we vote. On the issue of healthcare, it's not just the COVID-19, but it is so much more in terms of a plan to deal with the pandemic, but it's also a plan that can help pregnant women, to help women who are heads of household, single women, help their children, and help the men be able to flourish and live full lives. As a Catholic, Pope Francis says that there are many issues we have to face, but one of them is the capacity to be a healthy person. That's the pro-life stance, is to care for the unborn, care for the born, care for those at the margins. Then we're facing a housing crisis. This is one of the issues on the ballot that we need to pay attention to. Right now, we know that many have not been able to pay their rent. These are the low wage workers that I was just talking about. Not only have they lost income, but now they're facing growing debt with regards to back rent. It isn't that this rent was forgiven, it was just delayed. And so there is the terror of many that once this comes due, they're just going to be evicted in the middle of winter. So we've got to pay attention to this issue and ensure that we vote for a way that people, or for people that will provide for the needs of renters. It's always struck me as funny that those who owned houses get tax deductions to help pay the mortgage. But those of us like me that are renting, we have no support at all. Doesn't seem quite right. If you're wealthy enough to afford to buy a place, you get the tax break. But if you're an ordinary working family, you don't get any support from our tax policy at all. Maybe we need to make a change in that. And finally, I think that the key piece that we're facing in this election that Reverend Davis, you pointed out so clearly, was the fact that we have to do this as community. We have to do this together. And whether it's souls to souls, every vote matters. It's whatever program we've got. The important piece is to know that it's communal. Our nation was founded on the communal idea that it's we the people. Now, I will admit that when our Constitution was written, the we was a lot smaller than what we know now. We know that there was slavery and they were excluded. We know that women were excluded. We know that non-landowners were excluded. But over the years, over the decades, over the centuries, we've grown. That's what our Constitution is about, is forming a more perfect union. We're not there yet. We still have a long way to go. The issues of racial justice, gender justice, it's all at the front of our care and concern, but we've made progress. And together, we the people can do the most communal act of our democracy. The most communal act of our democracy is to vote, where we all come together. We vote based on our study, based on not a popularity contest, but based on the study of the policies that we seek as a people. This is the basis of our community. This is the basis of our democracy. We, the people, have this moment, this month of voting to engage and make a difference for our nation. Our nation needs us, and now is the time to step up. And now I get to hand this microphone, this moment, over to a good friend of mine, Reverend Jacqui Lewis, who's from Manhattan, who's the pastor at Middle Church. She is the senior pastor at Middle Church. She is the epitome of this communal call to make we the people. Reverend Lewis, welcome to our Nuns on the Bus Faithful Democracy Rally. I'm so glad you could join us.
I'm so glad to be here with you, Simone. I'll do anything you ask me to do. I think you know that. But I'm delighted to spend this time with the people on this virtual bus, thinking about democracy. Friends, you've heard Sister Simone, who is my Pope, by the way, talk about a little bit about Middle Church. You've never been to a place like Middle Church. It's in Manhattan on the Lower East Side. It was founded by the Dutch when they came to Turtle Island. to do fur trapping and to do business with the Lenape people who were here. I'm not proud to say that that's my heritage, our Dutch heritage. I'm not Dutch, but that's our church's heritage. But I need to say it because it is a part of my story. This land-seeking, wealth-seeking bunch of folks came and worshiped for the very first time in 1628 and created this congregation called the Dutch Reformed Church in New York that is now just called the Collegiate Church, meaning collegial. But we stand on the shoulders of the people who came and took the land, right? We stand on the shoulders of the people who came and used enslaved Africans to make their wealth. We stand on the shoulders of people who wrote founding papers that did not include us, whose vision for democracy was, as Sister Simone says, too small for who we are as a people today. So one of the reasons that my community has become what it's become is almost like to repair the brokenness that was our history. We are now all the things. We are African American and African diasporan and Latinx from Puerto Rico to Colombia to Venezuela to Mexico. We are all kinds of white. And let us never forget that white people have ethnicity. So we're Polish and German and English and Dutch, and we're mixed. We are Asian, Japanese, Chinese, Hmong, Korean, and we are indigenous as well. All those ethnicities living together, bound by a desire to heal what's broken in our land. We are gay and straight and bi and trans. We're super old people who worked in civil rights movements past, and young people like my grandchildren, Octavius and Ophelia. Ophelia's 2 and Octavius is 6 months old. Octavius is named after a man named Octavius Cato, who was a voting reform worker in Philadelphia. And he was murdered after voting for one of the very first times and shot in the back in the city of brotherly love because of the work that he did. My congregation, my community, my multi-everything community, full of young people and old people, full of people who named God as out of their theology and who follow the way of Jesus, but also people who are Muslim and Jewish and no faith at all worship in our community because they believe in love. And what we understand as we stand on the shoulders of the people who tried to build something that's not quite what it can be, we understand that we're living into a promise. We understand that there is a vision that has not yet been fulfilled, and that our part, old, young, every gender, every sexuality, people of really strong faith and people whose faith is shaky in this COVID time, is to be repairers of the breach, to take the dreams of the old and the young, to take the dreams of the past and live into the future, to bind ourselves in a movement across the nation with people like Valarie Kaur and Sister Simone Campbell, people of all faiths who understand that love is the only thing that will heal us. And so we lean into the fiercest love. We understand that voting is not just a political act. We understand that it is an act of faith. It is exercising our faith in each other, our faith in love, our faith in the higher power to which we feel related, but also faith in the promise that our democracy can be something else. My little grandson can't vote yet. So when we are working together at Middle Church on voting rights through our Voters' Rights Reforms Program, we are acting on behalf of all of the little ones in our community. The little ones who sing every week, we are marching in the light of God. We are marching in the light of God. We're taking their interest. We're taking their future because they're banking on us when we go to the polls. We're taking education. We're taking healthcare. We're taking the concern for a healed and whole Mother Earth. We're taking prison reform. We're taking anti-poverty work. We're taking their futures with us to the polls. And that's why we've written almost 30,000 postcards to voters all over the country to remind them to vote, to remind them to register to vote, because we believe this is an act of our faith to create the future for all of the ones who are coming behind us. I stand on the shoulders of those Dutch people who broke something in America, and I also stand on the shoulder of my great uncle George, who was friends with Fannie Lou Hamer, who created a voters reform movement in Louisville, Mississippi, where they are both buried. Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, "When I liberate others, I liberate myself." So friends, I say to you, standing on the shoulders of Uncle George and standing on the shoulders of my Dutch heritage from my church, standing, holding Octavius and Ophelia in my arms, every vote matters, and who we vote for matters. And I'm asking you, as you register to vote, as you think about voting, that you vote for love. What would love have us do? What would love look like as we create a legacy and inheritance for all of the little people coming behind us? You can find more about the work that we're doing, the multi-everything movement of love and justice at middlechurch.org. And I'm asking you, whatever is despairing, whatever feels hard, take yourself and your heart to the polls and vote love up and down the ticket. Thank you. And we now are going to hear from Representative Clyburn. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. This is the House Majority Whip, Representative James Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis, for having me here with you. I appreciate the opportunity to be present for this event. We are having a little bit of an issue here trying to get adjusted from one to another. If you hold just a moment. Okay. Gotta go down. I don't know. Well, let me just go anyway. Okay, thank you. Sister Simone, thank you so much. I did not get a chance to see you. I was on another call this morning, but I understand that you were fabulous this morning on, I guess, MSNBC. Thank you so very, very much. As many of you know, I was born and raised in the parsonage. My father was a fundamentalist minister, and we talked an awful lot about my joining him that profession when I came of age. And when I went away to South Carolina State in the rural community of Orangeburg, I thought sure I would be there for 4 years, and I was going on to the seminary. Well, I was not there long before I got involved in the sit-ins. And I tell people all the time, I always thought you had to be called to the ministry, and I kept listening. I never heard the call. So I went home to tell my dad that I had changed my mind and I was not going to go to the seminary. I thought he would be very disappointed, and he probably was. But he said to me on that day, "Well, son," he said, "I suspect the world would much rather see a sermon than to hear one." And I have been working ever since to make sure that in whatever my endeavors may be, that the world will see in my work a good, productive sermon. But there's one other thing I got from my dad. My dad used to keep 3 books in his pulpit. One was the Bible, one was a hymnal, and one was a book that he created himself. And in that book was a list of every registered voter in the precinct that our church was located, and of course the parsonage was next door. Well, I learned from that effort because my dad, every election day, he would make it his business to get every registered voter to the polls. And so I, years ago, decided to further my dad's work by creating a program that I call Adopt a Precinct. And I started asking churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, whatever it may be, adopt a precinct. maybe not just the precinct that you're located in or you live in, but get a precinct and let your congregations get involved in the effort, because I'm a true believer in the second chapter of James, where we are told that faith without works is dead. And if we are to do for the needy, we've got to use the mechanism of the governmental process to make it work, so we can feed the hungry and clothe the naked and do good for those who are fellow men and women. And so this year, we are in my state, and we're trying to do it all over. We have decided that although election day is November 3rd, we are going to have election month. October is going to be election month in almost every jurisdiction. There are methods by which people can vote early. In South Carolina, we call it absentee voting. You can vote absentee starting October 5th. You don't need any excuse, as we used to have this year because of COVID-19. You just need to exercise the right. You don't need to tell them whether or not you got to work or you're going to be out of town, any reason or no reason. And we are trying to get people to, and there are two reasons for that. One is this: we feel very strongly that the current occupant of the White House plans to declare himself reelected on election night. If the polls close on November 3rd, with him in the lead, he will declare himself elected, and every other vote coming in later will be fraud. We are fearful of that. So we're asking people to vote in person early, so as to have your votes counted on election day. And secondly is because the current occupant of the White House has made it his business to undercut the postal system. And we have no idea how long it's going to take for the mail-in ballots to get counted. So we want to do what we can for everybody to get voted by November 3rd. So thank you all so much for all that you do, all that I know you're going to do in order to make October election month. Not close with this. I have often heard it say, though I've not been able to find that he ever said it, that Alexis de Tocqueville, in talking about this great country, said that America is great because its people are good. And if the people of America ever cease to be good, America will cease to be great. I feel very strongly, irrespective of whether or not de Tocqueville ever said that, I believe it to be true, that this year, America's goodness is on the ballot. And if we lose America's goodness, we're going to lose this great democracy. Thank you, and Godspeed. And now, let me yield, as we say here in the Congress, to Sister Quincy Howard for whatever time she may consume.
It won't be long, and thank you so much. I am Sister Quincy Howard here. I'm a nun on the bus, and I'm also the coordinating director of the Faithful Democracy Coalition. Deepest gratitude to our preachers for their inspirational words, including Congressman Clyburn for his sermon and for his vocation as a legislator. I want to share today the Faithful Democracy Sacred Season of Voting campaign that begins today. It's another resource to help people of faith stay energized and be prepared during this critical period. We use a multi-faith framing around religious holidays over the coming weeks, combined with targeted get out the vote actions that are based on key election deadlines and common voter pitfalls, so that every vote is counted. It is meant to be a resource to ground us in faith and solidarity during an anxious, turbulent time, while also energizing people of faith around the power of the vote and the need to have a plan to vote early in this extended 2020 election season. The first week of Sacred Season of Voting is already posted on our resources page, faithfuldemocracy.us. And in the coming weeks through the election, we'll push out a new reflection and get out the vote messaging on Mondays. We hope it helps people move through this time with hope, confidence, and determination to have all of our voices heard. Now it is my honor to introduce Valarie Kaur of the Revolutionary Love Project to bring us home.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Sister Howard, and thank you to our beloved Sister Simone. I'm so grateful that I could still be with you, with the nuns on the bus in a time when I most needed this nourishment and this energy. It struck me today, in this hour that we've spent together, how much I have felt the presence of our ancestors. Rabbi Pesner summoned John Lewis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Reverend Tawana Davis summoned Toni Morrison. Reverend Jacqui Lewis summoned her great uncle George. And Congressman Clyburn, who we just heard, summoned his father, who got every voter to the polls. In a time when it is this dark, when the fires are this bright, when the future is this uncertain, I believe that each of us can summon the ancestor we need at our backs. Who are you going to summon? Who makes you brave? When I close my eyes and I see my grandfather in my heart, my grandfather, my ancestor, who I choose to summon today, came to the United States in 1913 from India, wearing a turban and beard as part of our Sikh faith. When he arrived at Angel Island, he was immediately interrogated and incarcerated for months. You see, Ellis Island on the West Coast was a symbol of inclusion for European immigrants, but Angel Island was a symbol of exclusion for Asian immigrants. And so deportation was all but assured in this moment of white nationalist zeal, except for the intervention of a lawyer, a white man who saw my grandfather as not just a neighbor, a brother, and filed a writ of habeas corpus to set him free. My grandfather made his way down the Central Valley. He was a simple farmer. He slept in barns at night, sleeping actually in crates to keep himself safe from the snakes. That was his life. He survived the 1918 Spanish flu. He fought decades of racist laws just to be able to earn the right to become a citizen. That generation did that for us. And once he finally became a citizen, he never missed an election. Never. Even when he was old and frail, even when he was in his 90s, my father would scoop him up in his arms, his small body like a baby, and take him to the polls so that he could cast his vote. He believed in America. He believed that we were the ones who could choose what America was going to be for his children and his grandchildren. The right to vote was always sacred in our family. The fierce and faithful obligation of voting, that's what we invoke today, that was always sacred in my family. When I think about my grandfather now, I wonder, what would he think of us? How heartbroken would he be to see a pandemic that he thought he had survived, another version of it return with even greater ferocity, disproportionately killing people of color? What would he think when he saw the 5 million acres burning here in the state of California, my childhood woods burned to the ground, the sky so orange that we can't see the sun for days, for weeks? What would he think? To see the hate violence in our streets, the racial slurs that his great-grandson has had to bear at the age of 4 years old. What would he think? To see a president, as we saw in that first debate, to see the President of the United States himself be the greatest threat to our democracy. This election, everything our ancestors fought for, a world of dignity and equality and justice, everything they fought for is at stake with this election. How do we refuse despair when it is this dark and this uncertain and this difficult? This summer, a week after George Floyd was murdered, our neighborhood in Los Angeles became militarized, like many cities across the nation. There were helicopters shaking the house day and night. There were assault rifles and assault vehicles in the street. We didn't leave the house. I was afraid for my brown children until we finally got in the car. We had to leave a week later, and my son was in the back seat. He's now 5, and I was so worried that he was going to look out the window and see the men with rifles standing in front of his preschool and in front of the cafes where mommy did so much of her work. Our neighborhood was transformed. And I thought he was going to see the rifles and I would have to explain it to him. Everything that I had been trying to hide, the police killings and the torch-bearing white supremacists and the hate murders and the authoritarian assaults under this presidency. And I would finally have to let my son see me cry. But my son, his eye fell on something that struck him with a sense of awe, a sense of wonder. And I followed his eye line and I realized he was looking at pieces of plywood that were thrown up on storefronts. And on those pieces of plywood, these big, beautiful works of art, Brianna, Tamir, Trayvon, George, BLMs, and hearts everywhere. And my son looked at me and he said, "Mommy, did you do this?" Because all he hears his mommy talk about is revolutionary love. And I said, "No, my love, we did this. Millions of us, there are millions of people in this country right now that are like you and me, who believe in love and justice. Millions of us are flooding the streets in our grief and our rage and fighting for justice with love, insisting on an America that is yet to be born. We're not alone. You may not be able to see them. We have to be socially distant. We may not be able to be shoulder to shoulder to feel it, but we know that we are not alone." And so I ask you, in this moment, to reclaim love in your life. Revolutionary love is when we are brave enough to see no stranger, to look at anyone and say, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." And that means that when we come together in our grief and our rage and fight for justice and democracy and still insist on the humanity of our opponents, we are birthing the world to come, a world that leaves no one behind. But this is hard labor. This is difficult labor, and we cannot do it alone. So I ask you to remember that we are with you, your sisters, your brothers, your siblings, all of us, you've heard. And your children, the children in your life, are in front of you. And you have your ancestor at your back, whispering in your ear, "You are brave. You are brave. You are brave." Let's do this. Let's make October election month. I send you off with a prayer that my grandparents taught me, a Sikh prayer called Tawana Davis. The hot winds cannot touch you. Tawana Davis, Pad Brahm Shunai, Jogit Hamare Ram Kar, Dukh Lage Na Pai, Satgur Pura Petya Jin Bant Manai, Ram Naam Okhad Diya Eka Livlai, Rakh le Otin Rakhan Had Sab Yad Mitai, Ko Nanak Kirpa Pe Prape Sahai. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves.